You're homeless now, he laughed right as my suitcase slammed onto the pavement and split open in the street. People were watching, and he didn't care. I'm Daniel. Was my apartment building. Middle of the day, my things everywhere, neighbors staring from their balconies like it was some kind of show. I tried to tell him this made no sense. Rent was paid. We had an agreement. He just smirked and kicked another box off the steps. New tenant pays more, he said. You're done. Then everything stopped. A black car pulled up right in front of us, engine still running. The driver stepped out, calm, precise, not even looking at me. He walked straight up to my landlord and said, "Before you touch anything else, read the deed." And the way my landlord's face changed, that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For a second, no one moved. Kessler's hand was still midair, like he was about to throw another box. But he didn't. His smile didn't disappear completely, but it cracked, just enough for me to notice. "What?" he said, turning slowly. "Who are you supposed to be?" The man didn't answer right away. He adjusted his sleeve, like this was just another routine stop in his day, not whatever this was. Then he looked past Kessler, briefly scanning the building, windows, balconies, the front entrance like he already knew it. "I said," he repeated, calm but firm, "read the deed." Something about his tone shifted the air. Even the workers who had been dragging my furniture onto the sidewalk stopped and looked at Kessler, waiting. I was still standing there, half in shock, half in anger, trying to piece together what was happening. My clothes were scattered across the pavement. My laptop bag was open. Everything I owned out in the open like it meant nothing. "This doesn't concern you," Kessler snapped, louder now, trying to recover. "Private property, tenant removal, completely legal." He reached into his jacket like he was about to pull out paperwork, but his hand hesitated. The man in front of him didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just pulled a folded document from his own briefcase and held it out. Not to me. To Kessler. "Go on," he said quietly. "Take a look." Kessler didn't want to. I could see it in his face. But too many people were watching now, tenants leaning over railings. Someone across the street had already pulled out their phone. Slowly, reluctantly, Kessler grabbed the paper. He unfolded it once, then again, and just like that, his entire expression changed. The confidence, the arrogance, gone. "What is this?" he muttered. The man finally turned his head this time, looking straight at me, and said, "You might want to stay exactly where you are." Kessler laughed again, but this time it didn't land the same. It came out thinner, forced, like he was trying to convince everyone, maybe even himself, that nothing had changed. He folded the paper quickly, almost too quickly, and shoved it back toward the man. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," Kessler said, straightening his jacket, "but this is my building to manage. Always has been." The man didn't take the paper back immediately. He just let it hang there between them for a second, like he was giving Kessler one last chance to think before speaking again. Then he took it, calmly slid it back into his briefcase, and said, "Is it?" That was it. No raised voice, no argument, just two words. But they hit harder than anything Kessler had said all afternoon. I was still trying to catch up. My mind kept jumping between what had just happened and what I'd lost. My apartment, my stability. The last place that felt like something I could hold on to after months of scraping by. And now this stranger was standing here like he knew something no one else did. "Look," I said, stepping forward before I could stop myself. "I don't know who you are, but he's throwing me out without notice. I paid everything. "I'm aware," the man said, cutting in gently, not even looking surprised. That stopped me cold. Kessler scoffed. "Of course you are. Another one of these tenant advocates, right? You people show up after the fact, make noise, then disappear when it's time to actually do something." The man finally turned to him fully. "My name is Laurent." That was all he offered. No title, no explanation, just a name and the kind of calm that made Kessler shift his weight without realizing it. Laurent reached into his pocket as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, answered it without stepping away. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm standing in front of the property now. Yes, I've seen it." "Mm-hmm. His eyes flicked toward me for a brief second. How long has he been here? He asked into the phone. Kessler let out a sharp laugh. Oh, now you're doing interviews? Laurent ignored him. I hesitated. 2 years, I said, unsure why I was answering. Almost exactly. Laurent nodded slightly, like that confirmed something important. Understood, he said, into the phone. Stay on standby. He ended the call and slipped the phone away, then looked at Kessler again, this time with less patience. Who authorized the removal? Laurent asked. I did, Kessler snapped instantly. I don't need approval to remove a tenant who's outlived his usefulness. A few of the neighbors reacted to that. I heard someone mutter, that's not how leases work. Kessler ignored them. So unless you've got something official, he continued, gesturing dismissively, you can step aside and let me finish what I started. Laurent didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just reached into his briefcase again, and this time, when he pulled something out, he didn't offer it to Kessler right away. Instead, he looked straight at me. Really looked like he was measuring something. Then he said, quietly but clearly, you might want to stay right here. And the way he said it made it sound like leaving would be a mistake, because whatever was about to happen next, it wasn't just about my eviction anymore. Kessler's smile slipped the moment Laurent unfolded the document. Not fully. He tried to hold on to it, but there was a hesitation now, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. What is this supposed to be? Kessler asked, though his voice had already lost some of its edge. Laurent didn't rush. He held the paper steady, angled just enough for Kessler to read it properly. A finalized transfer deed, he said, registered, processed 3 days ago. Silence hit the street like a switch had been flipped. Even I felt it, that shift, like something underneath everything we thought was stable had just moved. Kessler let out a short laugh, shaking his head. That's not possible. Ownership doesn't just change overnight. It doesn't, Laurent agreed, which is why this process started weeks ago. That landed differently. A few people had stepped closer now. I could see phones out, cameras pointed. This wasn't just my problem anymore. It was turning into a scene. Kessler glanced around, noticing it too. His posture tightened. Well, he said, trying to recover. Even if that were true, I'm still the acting manager. I have full authority to handle tenant issues. Laurent tilted his head slightly. Under whose authorization? Kessler opened his mouth, then paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. You don't need to worry about that, he said quickly. Everything I've done here is by the book. Then you won't mind clarifying, Laurent replied. The calm in his voice wasn't neutral anymore. It was pointed. Kessler's eyes flicked to me, then back to Laurent. This tenant violated terms, end of story. I didn't, I said, louder than I meant to. You told me last month my lease would be renewed. You said everything was fine. A murmur spread through the small crowd. Laurent didn't look surprised. If anything, it confirmed something for him. He stepped slightly closer to Kessler. Not aggressive, but firm enough to shift the balance. On what legal basis, Laurent asked, did you terminate his occupancy today? Kessler didn't answer right away this time. And that silence felt louder than anything he'd said before. Laurent reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed. I'll need verification on current management authority, he said when the call connected. Yes, immediately. Kessler's jaw tightened. You're overstepping. Laurent didn't even look at him. The call ended quickly. Laurent slipped the phone away, then turned back to me. Not Kessler. Me. They're on their way, he said. I frowned. Who is? Laurent held my gaze for a second, longer than comfortable. And then he said, they'll want to speak with you first. And suddenly, I wasn't just the guy being thrown out anymore. The next car didn't arrive quietly. It pulled up with purpose, slow, deliberate, and this time, no one mistook it for coincidence. 2 people stepped out. Not rushed, not aggressive, but official. You could tell by the way they moved, the way they looked at the building before even acknowledging anyone else. Kessler saw them, and for the first time, he stepped back. "What is this?" he said, his voice lower now. Controlled, careful. Laurent didn't answer. He just gave a slight nod toward the newcomers. They walked straight up to Kessler. "Mr. Kessler," one of them asked, already holding a folder. "We need to clarify your current authority on this property." Kessler forced a laugh. "My authority? I manage this building." "According to these records," the second one said, opening the folder, "ownership transferred 3 days ago under a holding trust. Your management status is unclear." Unclear. That word hung in the air. Kessler's confidence didn't just crack. This time it slipped. "I've been overseeing this property for years," he said quickly. "Nothing changes without my approval." "That's not accurate," Laurent said calmly. Everyone turned toward him. He stepped forward just enough to be heard clearly, but not enough to dominate the moment. "The transfer supersedes prior management agreements unless explicitly renewed," he continued, which in this case, it wasn't. Kessler shook his head. That's not how this works." But it was. You could see it settling in around him. The realization, the loss of control. I was still standing there, trying to process everything, when something hit me hard and out of nowhere. A letter a few weeks ago, official looking. I'd barely opened it. Something about an estate. I'd assumed it was a mistake or spam or anything that didn't matter. I swallowed. Laurent turned toward me again, not surprised, like he'd been waiting for that moment to land. "You received a notice," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. I didn't think it was real. A small pause. Then Laurent took a step closer. "This isn't random, Daniel," he said. Kessler looked between us, confusion starting to replace his frustration. "What is he talking about?" Laurent didn't answer him. He kept his eyes on me. And then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "There's something your father left you, and it includes this building." And in that moment, everything I thought I'd lost didn't make sense anymore. For a second, I thought I misheard him. "My father?" I said, the word feeling strange in my mouth. Laurent gave a single confirming nod. No hesitation this time. "Your father passed away 3 months ago," he said. "His estate was placed into a holding trust, multiple properties, including this building. You are listed as the sole beneficiary." The street went completely silent. Not just quiet still, like everything had paused to let that sink in. I stared at him, trying to connect that to anything in my life that made sense. But it didn't. Not immediately. My father and I hadn't spoken in years. Whatever he had built, whatever he had owned, I wasn't part of it. Until now. "I didn't sign anything," I said. "I didn't even know." "You didn't need to," Laurent replied calmly. "The transfer was executed through the estate. We've been trying to reach you. The letter you received was the formal notice." That letter, I felt it hit all over again. Behind us, one of the officials stepped forward. "Mr. Kessler," he said, firm and clear, "until your management authority is reviewed and reinstated if applicable, you are no longer permitted to act on behalf of this property." Kessler blinked. "You can't be serious." "I am," the official said, "and any tenant removals conducted under invalid authority may be subject to legal action." That landed hard. The same neighbors who had watched me get thrown out were now watching him, and this time no one was on his side. "I was just doing my job," Kessler said, but the confidence was gone. "The market changed. I adapted." "You removed tenants without legal standing," the second official cut in. "That's not adaptation." Kessler didn't have an answer. He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time since this started. But there was no smirk left, no control, just realization. Laurent turned slightly toward me. "As of this moment," he said, "authority over this property transfers to you." I glanced down at my things still scattered across the pavement, then back at the building. My building. A few minutes ago, I was standing there with nothing. Now, first, I said, my voice steady despite everything. No one else gets thrown out. Anyone who was evicted, bring them back. The officials exchanged a glance, then nodded. And him? I added, looking at Kessler. Laurent answered without hesitation. He's done here. Kessler didn't argue this time. He couldn't. The workers who had been helping him slowly stepped away. The same steps he stood on like he owned them no longer belonged to him at all. I picked up my suitcase, zipped it closed this time, not because I had to leave, but because I didn't. By the end of the day, my things were back inside. Doors reopened, conversations started. People who had been quietly pushed out began calling, asking if it was true. It was. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to hold on to something slipping away. I was standing on solid ground. Kessler said I was homeless. Turns out he was the one who didn't belong there anymore.